the Supreme Court allows the gender dysphoria military ban to go into effect. This is A Better World, and I'm your host, Luis Acevedo. So today we're only going to be covering one topic, as you can tell from the introduction, so let's get right into it. Today, the Supreme Court allowed the gender dysphoria military ban to go into effect in a 5-4 decision, all 4 liberal judges voting no. And if you'll recall, this was something that both President Trump and his former Defense Secretary, Jim Mattis, suggested back in March of 2018. Now, I have covered this before in prior episodes, and I've stated my opinion, and like I've said before, I believe this to be a good idea. Although there are arguments that can be made and have been that this is bigoted, and why wouldn't you just let people who want to serve in the military serve? Well, the way I see it is that there are numerous reasons as to why we shouldn't allow people who have gender dysphoria to serve. Chief among them is that people who have gender dysphoria have abnormally high rates of depression and commit suicide or attempt suicide at higher rates as well. An article in Live Science states that 41% of transgenders have attempted to commit suicide. This is significantly higher than the general population. This is the main reason why people are rallying for transgender rights, because they believe bullying and being ostracized by society has everything to do with the high suicide rates. While that may be in part true, it doesn't tell the whole story, because when you look at the suicide rates during the Holocaust or slavery, they show to be much lower than those who suffer with gender dysphoria. For example, during the Holocaust, the suicide rate among Jews was estimated at about 25%. These numbers are astonishing nonetheless and too high, regardless of the reasoning, but to blame it on bullying and being socially ostracized, and I just don't believe that that's a very credible argument to be had with some other historical atrocities don't actually line up with what is happening with the transgender community. So, moving on, the article in Military Times said in 2014, 18% of our nation's suicides were by veterans. Of that 18%, I'm sure a good chunk of them had no sort of mental health issue in general, were completely fine, but they saw something during their service that completely, radically changed their lives for the worst, so bad that they took their own life. And it leads one to question if this kind of work is something that people who suffer from this disorder should even do. With that, there are 15,500 active troops that are transgender and about 134,300 transgender people who are either veterans or retired from a study that was done by UCLA. Now, we can only speculate what the depression rate among these people are and the suicide rate and how they contribute to that 18% among military members that contribute to the national suicide rate. We can only speculate. However, I think it's safe to assume that the numbers are pretty high and they contribute a large portion of the percentage of veterans who commit suicide. Just based off the numbers that we have already read as of now, with the Live Science article and numerous other studies that have been conducted and articles that have been written to show they have abnormally high suicide and depression rates. So this in and of itself should be enough to illustrate why it's not a good idea to allow people who are transgender into the military. Now, the Army, as of 2009, will allow certain individuals to receive a waiver that have a mental health issue. Now, those exceptions tend to be people who were in behavioral counseling at 10 years old, which would otherwise disqualify them from the military without the waiver, which is why the waiver was set into place, because of those circumstances in which the person has been fine all of their adult life. However, they had an instance when they were a child, or there was just this one particular incident that caused them to go seek counseling for mental health issue, and it was an anomaly of their true character. So that's why the waiver was set into place. With that, the people who are transgender and want to join the military, they can apply or try to get a waiver to allow them to enter into the Army or whatever branch they would like to enter into. That would be the way that they would have to go about it. So they're not completely exempt from joining the military. It's just a certain demographic of those who suffer with transgenderism or gender dysphoria who are not allowed into the military. Now, I want to actually provide some of the exceptions from a CNN article that was pointed out for people who have gender dysphoria or are transgender will be able to still continue to serve, or just exceptions in general, and can still qualify for the military. And they are as follows: service members who have been stable for 3 years in their biological sex prior to joining the military. Service members diagnosed with gender dysphoria after joining the military can stay in the military if they don't require a change of gender and remain deployable. Gender dysphoria involves a conflict between a person's physical or assigned gender and the gender with which the person identifies, according to the American Psychiatric Association, which is, I have to digress real quick, because I don't understand how people are not able to realize gender dysphoria and transgender are the same thing. When somebody claims they're transgender, it's because they, by definition, have a conflict between their physical or assigned gender and the one in which they identify with. That's what being transgender is. Therefore, anybody who has transgender or is transgender would, by definition, have gender dysphoria, unless you are just pretending to be transgender, which is, we've covered in prior episodes as well, is proving to be a new trend that's going around, or that kids are pretending to be transgender because it's popular in the media. So, continuing. The next thing is that service members who are diagnosed with gender dysphoria before the effective date of the policy can still serve and receive medical treatment. Lastly, transgender persons without gender dysphoria diagnosis or history can serve in their birth sex. Now, what I want to touch on from those exceptions is the fact that in there lies another reason to support this ban, and that is it wouldn't allow people who are going through a sex change to join the military. It wouldn't allow people who are serving within the military now, since this ban has been put into effect, to get a sex change. And I completely agree with people who have gotten a sex change before joining, or in the process, or want to get a sex change while in their service, from being prohibited to join. The reason for that is because the Philadelphia Center for Transgender estimates the surgery cost ranging between $120,000 to $140,000. All that is floated by the American tax dollar. So if an active duty member wants to get a surgery like this, they're doing it on our dime. And it's not a necessity. It wasn't caused by warfare. There's no evidence to show that it will decrease long-term depression or long-term suicidal thoughts, anything like that. There is evidence. There is evidence that there is positive effects in the short term as far as reducing depression and suicide attempts. But overall, the longevity of it shows to be pretty insignificant. So that in and of itself would be another reason to support the ban, because it would save tons of money. Tons of money. Although there's only 1,000 or so, that's millions of dollars if they all wanted to get a sex change. Not saying they all do, but if they did, that we would have to pay so much money in that. So it wouldn't be best. And then plus you would have to change up how the military is designed. You would then have to literally change how men and women are treated when they join into the military, because if you have somebody who comes in as transgender, and they're a guy, biologically a male, but claim to be a female, well then that's going to mess up some functions within the military and how they separate the two sexes. It's just going to cause a lot of issues and a lot of headaches that are unnecessary, something we don't need when it comes to what is supposed to defend our nation and promote democracy across the world. We don't need that. It just causes more issues. Now, for those active members and people who have served and are retired, I thank you for your service. I have nothing against those who have served, done their time, or anything like that. My main argument in this is that I don't feel it is morally right to allow this group of people to join the military. I truly don't feel that it is, simply because of the predisposed illnesses that they have, which the main one is depression. They have extremely high rates of depression, and they attempt suicide at extremely high rates too. That's horrible. This isn't me criticizing them. This is just what it is, and it's very unfortunate. And you wouldn't end up putting somebody with, let's say, schizophrenia in the military because they would do more harm than good. They wouldn't be able to decipher who's the target and who's not the target. They may get confused, stuff like that. It just wouldn't be smart to do. And I know that wasn't maybe the best analogy, but the point is that you wouldn't let somebody who can cause harm to themselves or is at a certain disadvantage mentally to be put into a situation where they have to not only defend their lives but other people's lives and potentially take lives. I don't believe that's smart. I don't believe that's smart. I don't believe it's good. So we'll have to see exactly where this goes, because the Supreme Court didn't actually rule on the legality of the ban. They just said that the ban would be allowed to go through unless something that goes against it happens in the lower courts. So we'll see exactly what happens as this progresses. But that's what I wanted to talk to you guys about today. I hope you all enjoyed it, and we will see you again tomorrow. Peace.